I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I'm your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you episode number 45 of this podcast dedicated to the improvement of your brain and its operations by any and all means at your disposal. This is going to be a little bit of a special episode. As I record this, it is actually Memorial Day weekend, so the end of summer 2014, and apparently a great number of academics are exercising their right to enjoy their end of summer and not be bothered with things like telephone interviews. So a couple of interviews I was really hoping to have in the right about now time, or actually a couple of weeks ago, have gotten pushed to early September. So we're doing something a little bit different for this episode. I've got an interview with somebody who is making a mobile app for the nootropics community. We're going to talk about version 1.0 of that app, which is going to be hitting the iOS App Store very soon, and I think with a Android version to follow, but we'll save that for the main interview. If you hang around until the end of the episode, I'm going to tell you about an experiment that is right now getting underway, which some are calling the most important scientific experiment that will be done in our lifetimes. So them's fighting words where I come from. That's a pretty lofty claim, but we'll get into that. And if that will not be enough to keep you around for the end of the episode, I don't possibly pretend that I can know what would be. So stick around for that. But first of all, let's do This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts. This Week in Neuroscience.
So what is a brain donut and why should you be interested? Well, a brain donut is not a recently invented pastry that tastes like the human brain or any other brain. A brain donut is what scientists at Tufts University are calling something that they just made, a structure of lab-grown brain cells, which for the first time ever succeeds in basically getting a differentiation of white matter versus gray matter in the cell lattice structure of these petri dish-grown brain cells. They've been able to grow human brain cells, well, actually these are rat brain cells. They've been able to grow brain cells in the lab before, but they've all been sort of an undifferentiated clump together massive brain cells going this way and that, which isn't really representative of how brains actually get structured. Gray matter in a brain consists of the nerve cell bodies, while white matter is made up of axon fibers. These are the long fibers that can be many times the length of the cell body, and these actually carry the signals between different nerve cells. So these are both sort of differentiated tissue types within a brain, but they hadn't been able to do that in a lab until now. So their approach to make these donuts was that the scientists cut a spongy silk protein scaffold into a ring shape, and then they seeded it with rat neurons. The middle of the donut was filled in with a collagen-based gel, and in just a few days, the neurons formed functional networks around the pores of the scaffold. They sent axon projections through the centered gel, and that connected with the neurons on the other side. So if you kind of imagine like a hula hoop on the outside, that's where the cell bodies are held onto, and they're projecting their axons sort of in the middle, forming like a trampoline of axon fibers, might be the way to think of it. Tests showed that the brain-like constructs could be kept alive in the lab for more than 2 months, which is a good length of time because studying some sorts of like traumatic brain injury, which is what they think this is really going to be useful for, requires that the brain cells actually live long enough in a lab environment to see how problems progress when problems in the brain arise. So as I said, they're thinking that this has a lot of potential for studying how the brain responds to traumatic injuries, and it turns out that they are mimicking these effects by basically taking these brain donuts and dropping them from various heights. So I'm not sure. It's probably a very controlled scientific sort of thing, but I just kind of imagine these scientists dropping brain cells from various heights on the floor, and there's a Far Side comic in there somewhere. Said the co-author of the study, Professor Philip Hayden, this model provides a unique opportunity for mapping out real-time neurophysiological events and function studies in the lab, monitoring that would be prohibitive with humans or animals. The details of this research paper appear in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And we will link to it, as we always do, on the smartdrugsmarts.com website. And in further news that has nothing to do with actual donuts, picked up 2 more 5-star reviews on iTunes. Thank you very much to Joe Canarella and Al98980008, who say, respectively, great podcast all around. Smart Drug Smarts is an insightful podcast dedicated to the interesting world of nootropics and neuroscience. The show's entertaining and presented in an easy-to-listen manner. And Al says, like many listeners, I have been interested in the topic of brain enhancement for some time, and I find Jesse to be an eloquent, engaging host who is genuinely interested in his subject matter. Well, thanks, guys. Very much appreciated, and of course, we'll be keeping it up to the best of my abilities. We're now up to 59 reviews on iTunes, which ain't bad as reviews goes, and most of them are quite positive.
Smart Drug Smarts.
For those of you who happen to be around Iowa, you might remember two-time interviewee Dr. Terry Walls, MD, who's been on Smart Drug Smarts a couple of times. She's got an in-person live event seminar on her dietary Walls protocol on September 20th and 21st in Hiawatha, Iowa. So if you're in the Hiawatha, Iowa area or somewhere in striking distance of that and really want to meet Dr. Walls in person and learn about her protocol, we'll have a link to that too. And if you go, say hi for me, because I have not actually met Dr. Walls in person, but hope to get to do so one of these days. And now, with no further ado, let's go into the main interview. Who is this main interview, you ask? Who is it that could possibly be taking it upon him or herself to create a mobile app for the nootropics community? Well, it turns out that this interview guest that I've got happened to be the only person that I could get on extremely short notice for an overdue episode of Smart Drug Smarts. He is indeed making such an app. And for those of you who really need smart drugs and haven't figured it out yet, yes, I am referring to myself. Jesse Lawler, the publisher, host, etc. of Smart Drug Smarts, and now the creator of a mobile app called Axon. We're going to throw protocol aside and chuck the long-standing prohibition against sane people talking to themselves, and I'm going to interview myself. Let's just dive right into the interview, shall we?
Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast so smart, we have smart in our title twice.
So I'm here with Jesse Lawler, the creator of the mobile app Axon, which is going to be coming out soon on the iOS platform. Jesse, tell us about Axon. What is it? Why'd you do it? Okay, so Axon is a mobile app for Smart Drug Smarts podcast listeners, although, hopefully it can appeal to even people that don't necessarily listen to the podcast that are interested in nootropics. But what we're doing right now is it's a way of downloading all the past plus current episodes of the podcast, and then also being able to sort of skip around and jump to the audio points that you want, sort of based on little audio bookmarks that we've been doing in the past few episode posts. And also do text-based searches for topics if you want to sort of look something up in the Smart Drug Smarts library. So that's sort of element number one, is just access to the podcast in a way that people haven't had so far. Then probably the next most interesting thing that we're letting people do is actually voting on what they want to be included in future versions of the app. We're going to be doing continuous upgrades basically from this point forward, always going to be building on something new. And so we've got 5 choices in there right now. The users can weigh in and sort of give priority ordered votes on what they want to see next. Okay, so why do you call this thing Axon? If it's the Smart Drug Smarts app, why not just call it Smart Drug Smarts? Well, that was sort of the default choice, and we actually gave it the Smart Drug Smarts podcast logo is like the icon for the app. But it turns out that at least for Apple, you can only fit a certain number of characters underneath those little icons, and Smart Drug Smarts is just too long, so didn't want to kind of have like the middle of it cut out and replaced with a ... So I was trying to think of something brain-related and kind of cool to call it, and I was really surprised that actually the word Axon was available, because it's kind of a cool space-age-sounding word. People can spell it easily, and nobody had taken it yet. Just in case anybody's not clear on what an axon is, it's that long, spindly part of a nerve fiber. So you said iOS first for this one? Yeah, we're doing it for Apple first. I'm kind of an Apple guy first. Within our company, we do both mobile apps for iOS and Android and web applications and all that stuff, but figured we'd build it first on iOS and then sort of clone an Android version off of that. So now that we have the first version submitted to the Apple App Store, we're going to be starting to clone version 1.0 for Android quite soon, but don't have a hard and fast deadline for that one just yet. So the voting that you talked about earlier, can people do that? Can just anybody do that? I log in, I download it, I vote. What's to keep me from doing a bazillion different votes? Well, the voting is tied to usernames. And I guess, if you had enough... somebody that wanted to game the system could very easily create a bunch of fake users. We're making people create an account before they can vote. So it's sort of one user, one vote, although we're not... doing anything terribly technically sophisticated to keep people from creating multiple accounts. So somebody that cares that much can probably get an undue influence in the further development of the Axon app. We're probably flattering ourselves to think that anybody's going to care quite that much to try to tip the voting on what we do next in a free app, especially because all the things that we're thinking about for the potential next features are things we're going to be getting to eventually. It's just sort of a question of what order we attack them in. That said, I really do want to be responsive to what people are voting for. I'm very interested to see what the audience members and app users really want to see next. Okay, so as far as that goes, what are the, you said 5 choices? Yeah, so 5 features we are offering are, number 1, a nootropic data lookup. So basically sort of a almanac of information about different nootropics, kind of the high-level overview with then citations that could go off to different places. Related to that would be sort of a build my nootropic stack section where people could kind of keep track of what they're doing, how much of on what days, especially for those of us that are cycling different chemicals so we don't build up a tolerance to any one thing. Getting that organized and potentially being able to sort of collect that data and sort of share it with other people. Then there's sort of the general thing of quantified self stuff. Smart Drug Smarts listeners will remember 6 or 9 months ago, we did an episode with Sebastian Marshall talking about quantified self, and basically I'd like to support that within the app, give people the ability to ping themselves at random times throughout the day, take a quick measurement of where they're at, mood, cognition, alertness, all that stuff, and then cross-reference that with data about what they might have done that day, whether it's nootropics-wise, exercise-wise, the amount of sleep they got the previous night, and over the course of a period of months start to give people a little bit of a data-driven metric of what sort of inputs to their body are having, what sort of at least anecdotal outputs on their brain and the way that they're feeling. Then finally, the obligatory Smart Drug Smarts suggestion box. We basically got that on the web now. I'd like to build that into the app too, so if people are like, ooh, sitting in the subway or wherever, and you come up with an idea for something that you'd like to have be a Smart Drug Smarts episode, you can quickly drop us a recommendation. And finally, wanted to see about getting the game Dual In back that's gotten so much buzz in the past couple of years. I think there might even be open source implementations of that, so it might just be a matter of lifting that from some open source site and dropping it into the app. Either way, it probably wouldn't be too difficult to actually code that. It's not really a complex game to program, it's just a complex game to play. It's not exactly nootropic, obviously, but it's going to be of interest to people that are interested in cognitive enhancement. So those are the 5 things, and what we're doing is we're allowing people to assign up to 10 points to those 5 things and sort of tabulate all the votes. And I'm not sure exactly what date we'll set in mind to kind of look at all the votes and make a decision moving forward, but probably pretty soon. I mean, I'd say by mid to late September we'll see how people's voting goes and then go ahead and make a decision for what our next big programming push will be. Sounds pretty cool. So for the cheapskates out there in the audience, is this totally free?
Yeah, Axon is going to be a 100% free download. I mean, I think the games and stuff, they have in-app purchases. Not really planning on doing that. If we come up with some super awesome, informative something that we feel like would be a good in-app purchase thing, I'm not opposed to doing that in the future. But I mean, basically the goal right now is, I think, just to see what people like, get people using it. I'd like to get as much information as we can about what different nootropics people are taking, what types of stacks they're having success with, and build it into something where we've got a data set which is going to be useful to a large group of people. Obviously, there's always going to be some real variance in how diligent people are with filling out data about what they're taking and how frequently they're taking it and kind of keeping those things up to date. You know, it's like some people log into Facebook a couple times every day and their Facebook page is very, very accurate. And other people, maybe log on and check up what's going on every couple of weeks. But I think we can make Axon be something that'll be useful for both those types of users, both people that really want to dig deep into it and use it for keeping track of, my fish oil tablets are going to run out on this day and I need to order new vitamin D3 at the same time. Let me consolidate those orders or something, versus people that are going to maybe want it because it'll ping them when there's a new podcast episode out, and that's kind of the extent of it. So I would really like to make this the go-to app for nootropics fans, but part of that is going to be a community-guided process on what people are really into, and then we'll just do the coding to get it there.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So thank you very much to Jesse for giving his valuable time. No, I'm just kidding. But no, thanks for hanging out on that self-interview. That was kind of fun. And I would also like to throw out a thank you to Kyle Ross of Boise, Idaho, who is the Smart Drug Smarts listener that recommended the do-it-yourself transcranial direct current stimulation topic that we did for episode number 44. I think that was actually an email recommendation, if I remember correctly. But were Kyle or somebody like him to make a recommendation now, there's also the webpage that we have set up at smartdrugsmarts.com/suggestion-box, where you can go and let us know anything that you think would be good for a main interview topic, ruthless listener retention gimmick, or a This Week in Neuroscience article. But thank you once again to Kyle Ross. And now, as promised, the ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Okay, so I don't remember if we have talked about the simulation hypothesis on Smart Drug Smarts before, but if not, it's about damn time, because the simulation hypothesis is probably one of the most interesting ideas I've heard of personally in the past couple of years. I heard about this about a year ago, and it definitely sent me intellectually reeling for a few days when I first heard about it, because it's kind of undeniably one of those things that, oh yeah, that could be true, and I've never thought of that, and that actually kind of has repercussions for the way I think about the world. So here it is in a nutshell, and I highly encourage you to look up the simulation hypothesis if my explanation here does not do it justice, or if you're interested and you want to hear more. So as you're probably aware, computers are pretty good right now. We can do a lot of amazing things on computers, among them play pretty convincing video games. The Pitfall and first version Mario Brothers of 20 years ago have given way to these amazing first-person shooters shooter, 3D, whatever games where everything is pretty much almost photorealistic in real time, and these things just keep getting better and better and better. And barring some sort of Planet of the Apes-like societal collapse, it certainly stands to reason that computer simulations will continue to get better and better and better, and more immersive and more able to represent even broader worlds with more simultaneous characters and interactions and blah, blah, blah. You're also probably familiar with the movie The Matrix from 1997 and kind of the idea of characters living in a simulated world without being aware that they're living in a simulated world. So let's think about the next 20, 100 years, whatever it is, of progress in real-world modeling and computer simulations and cheap hard drives and amazing advances in processor power, and combine all these things and think about a grad student in history who's addressing the questions that history people always wonder about, like, hey, what would have happened if the other side had won the Battle of Hastings? Or what if Julius Caesar just really hadn't been that attracted to Cleopatra? How might that have changed things? And so this theoretical grad student and others like him, in the writing of their term paper, they pop in a bunch of data and boot up the simulated version of planet Earth 3000 BC and play it forward to the point where they're interested in doing their alternate history studies. They change a couple of variables and they run that a couple hundred times and say, hey, if Julius Caesar hadn't thought Cleopatra was that attractive, there would be a 73% chance that the French Revolution never would have happened, or, something like that. So none of this seems completely implausible. But of course, for a historical simulation to have any merit, it would need to be convincing to the people that lived inside it. The humans that lived inside it, if they knew that they were just little puppet stage actors or whatever, it wouldn't make for a very good experiment, because that's obviously not how the real world is, right? So the simulated environment would need to be convincing to the simulated beings that live and operate within it. But if we can say that there's probably a heck of a lot of future grad students with access to this computer power, and there's probably the need to run these simulations in a large number of times to get enough data to be statistically relevant and make other assumptions of this sort, then it stands to reason that there would be a heck of a lot more simulated universes than there would be the one real universe, whatever the ordinal universe is. So then you think about yourself, human being, whatever your name is. If the pieces of information that you have to go on are A, I think I exist, and B, I think that this hypothesis about there being a significantly large number of reality simulations being possible at some point in the future, at any point in the future, then it reasonably stands that the chances that you yourself are in the real universe versus one of these many simulations is vanishingly small. And that's freaky, right? It's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. It doesn't really mean anything, but it just might mean that the universe, such as we think of it, is just a facsimile, just a test tube creation. But how would we ever know, right? If it was a really convincing universe, then how could we detect that? So some smarty pants a few years ago posited that something called pixelation effects might be used to detect whether we live in a real, smooth, continuous universe that is not broken up into discrete chunks, or whether we actually live in a pixelated simulation universe. So think about a computer screen for a second, or a television screen. When you step back and look at the picture, it looks like reality, or pretty close to it. When you get way up close to it, you see that it's just a bunch of red and green and blue dots, and that these discrete dots are making up the image that you perceive. As long as they're small enough, or your eyes are far enough away from them, the dots become irrelevant. But when you get up close, you can kind of see, like, oh, you know what? That wasn't a perfect image like reality is. That's actually just a facsimile made up of these discrete chunks. Well, so it would be, these scientists hypothesize, with a reality simulation. If you went down deep enough and really burrowed into reality, you would start to see pixelation effects. They're talking about a pixel size of space that would be roughly 10 trillion times smaller than an atom, says Craig Hogan, the director of the Fermi Lab Center for Particle Astrophysics and the developer of the holographic noise theory. We want to find out whether space-time is a quantum system just like matter is. If we see something, it will completely change ideas about space that we've used for thousands of years. So what they're going to do to try to get to the bottom of whether the universe is made up of space pixels, they're essentially going to put two big long laser beams right next to one another. These are super high-powered laser beams, about the equivalent of 200,000 laser pointers each, and see how those beams interact with one another. Quantum theory suggests that it is impossible to know both the exact location and the exact speed of subatomic particles. Now, if space comes in two-dimensional bits with limited information about the precise location of objects, then space itself would fall under the same theory of uncertainty. The same way that matter continues to jiggle as quantum waves even when it's cooled down to absolute zero, digitized space, if it is in fact made up of these small pixels, should also have built-in vibrations even when in its lowest energy state, says physicist Aaron Chow, if we find a noise that we cannot get rid of, and by noise he's talking about sort of a jiggle in the way that these lasers interact, then we might be detecting something fundamental about nature, a noise that is intrinsic to space-time. It's an exciting moment for physics. A positive result will open a whole new avenue of questioning about how space works. This experiment is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Science, and other sources, and is expected to gather data over the coming year. So stay tuned to find out whether you are real or not.
Smart Drug Smarts.
Okay, you heard it. That is the episode. If you like this episode, even though it was off format from our normal offering, please recommend this podcast to your friends and or leave us a review on iTunes. And now, soon, you'll be able to actually go to the iTunes store and download the Axon app. And if you like that, leave a positive review, even though, as mentioned, it's certainly not in its final form just yet. The show notes for this episode will be online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com. And I will be back at you next week, or something shockingly close to next week. So we will be back at an unpredictable and yet assured time, sometime in the relatively near future, to help you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. Have a great week and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only. Although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.